Thank you. First of all, I want to thank your Commission for the invitation to inform you about 4 child abuse cases we are working on for so many years already. I myself represent 2 Turkish witnesses who were raped and sexually abused when they were 11 and 14 years old. The perpetrator was, according to my sources, a high-ranking Dutch government official nowadays, Secretary General of the Ministry of Security and Justice in the Netherlands, Mr. Joris Demmink. I also represent B, who is present today and already was giving a testimony to you. B was a victim of the same Dutch high-ranking official, Mr. Demmink, at the time that he, as a young boy of 14 years old, was forced to work in a brothel. I was informed about the crimes committed by Mr. Demmink in Turkey by official Turkish sources. They informed me that Mr. Demmink in '95 was caught in the act of sex with minors in Turkey while attending a party in Bodrum. At this party, minors were abused, sexually abused, and one of the boys tried to escape and created a great deal of emotion, which brought the police. Mr. Demmink was then arrested, according to my sources, and subsequently released, after which his criminal file was used to blackmail the Dutch authorities to take action in a case against a Kurdish activist who at that time stayed in the Netherlands. I'm also the attorney of this Kurdish businessman named Mr. Baybasin. The 2 well-documented criminal charges that were filed against Mr. Demmink by the 2 Turkish boys, Osman and Mustafa, were never investigated according to Dutch criminal investigative procedure. The same goes for the criminal charges filed by my other client, Mr. Baybasin, against Mr. Demmink. The victim, who's present today, B, was in '98 key witness in the so-called Rolodex investigation, but neither his statement ever led to an investigation. Never led to an investigation or prosecution or conviction of the real perpetrators, the high-ranking customers, the Dutch super elite of the numerous minor brothels in our capital, Amsterdam, at the time. The question arises, Mr. Chairman, what is going on in the Netherlands? In your 2012 report on human trafficking, you recognized the Netherlands as a Tier 1 status country in full compliance with the minimum standards to combat trafficking in persons. And my experience in the 4 cases I represent is completely different. High-ranking government officials and politicians in the Netherlands seem to form a privileged elite who are above the law when they sexually abuse minors and will never be arrested, tried, or convicted. In 2000, The Guardian, 12 years ago, described in a very well-informed article the Netherlands and especially Amsterdam as a paradise for pedophiles where the police seemed to be powerless to act. And we now understand why. In '98, an Amsterdam police investigation, B spoke about it, called the Rolodex Affair, was conducted into a pedophile network of influential Dutch customers of boys' brothels. The investigation targeted high-ranking Dutch officials and politicians suspected of abusing young boys in Amsterdam brothels. As a victim, B was what he said, of the key witnesses in that investigation. One of the suspects in that investigation was Mr. Demmink. But according to leading investigators who told me that, leading investigators in this case, according to them, as soon as Demmink became a person of interest in this matter, the investigation was shut down. Information about intended actions by the investigating police was leaked. A policeman who worked on this investigation said that he arrived at the location and the middleman of this network, Professor Van Roon, was waiting for the police team. And not surprisingly, all video evidence was missing and all telephone communication between the suspects, which was recorded before, suddenly stopped. law enforcement officials on the case were forced to sign non-disclosure agreements and were sworn to secrecy regarding all information pertaining to the involvement of Demmink and other high-ranking officials in this shocking behavior. Our present State Secretary of Justice, Fred Teven, directly under the Minister of Justice, was one of the leading prosecutors in this Rolodex investigation. In 2007, he expressed his frustration about the blocking of the investigation in a closed court hearing under oath. He then told the court that this investigation indeed targeted high-ranking representatives of the Dutch government, among them prosecutors, who were sexually abusing minors. He also stated under oath to the court that this investigation never has led to prosecution of these suspects because of certain contra-actions. 2007, he stated that under oath. And when a Dutch publication in the Gay Krant accused Mr. Demmink in 2003 of being involved in the abuse of minor boys in a park in the south of Netherlands, the newspaper, the Gay Krant, for homophile people, the newspaper was forced to withdraw its accusations under threat of bankruptcy by Demmink's lawyer. The editor of the Gay Krant, Henk Krol, at the moment parliament member in the Netherlands, was told by Demmink in a private meeting directly after that he, Demmink, indeed has had sex with young boys without asking their age. But Demmink let Krol know during that same meeting, "Remember well, Mr. Krol, that we are the ones who make the laws in this country." In 2008 and 2010, I filed 3 well-documented criminal charges against Mr. Demmink on behalf of my Turkish clients Osman and Mustafa for rape and sexual abuse of minors under the age of 16. The criminal charges filed by Mustafa against Demmink were never really investigated. The Dutch authorities dismissed the allegations after demanding that Mustafa first had to travel to the Netherlands to officially answer their questions. But meanwhile, the boy was heavily threatened and abused in Turkey. His tongue was cut with a razor blade. "You have to shut your mouth," in an effort to quash his complaint. The boy was approached by the then high-ranking police chief Emin Arslan in Turkey, who offered him a good life in case he withdrew his charges against Demmink. If not, the boy's life would be destroyed, so they told him. The boy was frightened to death, but never withdrew his charges against Demmink. He had his experience in Turkey, where you don't have any right in front of such high-ranking officials. And as a result of what happened to Mustafa, I asked the Dutch prosecutor to arrange official security for Mustafa during his stay in the Netherlands to give his statement. I also asked the Dutch prosecutor to allow his lawyer to be present during the police interview. And these requests were consequently refused despite the terrifying experiences Mustafa went through. Mustafa did not travel to Holland to answer questions about his accusations against Demmink as a result of this, but he offered again and again to answer all questions the Dutch police and prosecutors still might have in Turkey in an official inquiry hearing. But such an inquiry has never occurred. The second Turkish boy, Osman, traveled to the Netherlands, where he was also a client of mine, where he was interrogated by Dutch investigators in February 2011. However, a thorough criminal investigation was never initiated in this case either. 5 witnesses, and Mr. Chairman, President spoke about it already, with direct knowledge about this crime were waiting in Turkey to be interviewed by Dutch prosecutors. But they were ignored until now. The Turkish policeman Mehmet Korkmaz, who was Demmink's security officer during the Secretary General's visit to Turkey and who had since admitted kidnapping minor boys for Demmink to abuse, he offered to be heard by Dutch police in Turkey, despite risk of his personal safety. No one from the Netherlands ever contacted him. His testimony can be seen on the video on our website, and I thought will be presented here too for some fragments out of it. And the same goes for the former chief of the Istanbul police, Necdet Menzir. He also was willing to testify about Demmink's visits to Turkey in the 90s and the fact that his police officers were ordered to protect Demmink. No one ever contacted him either. Subsequently, also the offer of a third Turkish boy, Yasin, who said to have been sexually abused by Demmink in this Bodrum event in '95, also he was ignored by the Dutch authorities. Despite this overwhelming amount of available primary witnesses, the criminal charges filed by Osman and Mustafa never led to an official criminal investigation as defined in the Dutch Code of Criminal Procedure. The prosecutors persisted that there was not enough ground to call Mr. Demmink a suspect and to start an official criminal investigation against him. Only a so-called exploratory investigation was conducted, and that's not even existing in Dutch Code of Criminal Procedure. And without an official criminal investigation based on the Dutch Code of Criminal Procedure, the hands of the prosecutors were completely tied, according to their own words to Mr. Langedoen and me in a meeting. Without an official suspect and an official criminal investigation, the prosecutors lacked the authority to travel to Turkey to interrogate the available witnesses and to properly investigate the data of Demmink's official and non-official trips in the 90s. And in the Netherlands, where it only takes an anonymous tip to initiate not only a criminal investigation, but also police actions such as arrest and house search, the reaction of the prosecutor on this matter can be called quite absurd. Instead of performing its own research, the prosecutor's office has simply taken for granted Demmink's alibi that he never visited Turkey since '87. A Dutch research journalist, however, who asked the Ministry of Security and Justice to be provided with all the travel dates of their high-ranking officials in the 90s, him was told that all travel documentation older than 5 years was destroyed. That was in February 2012. That's why the final conclusion of the prosecutor in Osman's case in February 2012 was that it could not be confirmed that Demmink traveled to Turkey in the 90s. That's why they refused further investigation. Moreover, Turkish authorities have leaked documents proving that, notwithstanding his denials, Joris Demmink did indeed enter Turkey in the 90s. At the time, Mr. Demmink was Director General of International Affairs of the Dutch Ministry of Justice, and as a member of the European Union K4 Committee, he was especially responsible for the Kurdish-Turkish conflict. Even without the Turkish documents we received, it's inconceivable for the Dutch to claim that a high-ranking European official with duties specially focused on Turkish conflict with the Kurds would not have visited Turkey during the 90s. That would be equivalent to an American ambassador of Turkey based in Washington who never visited Turkey. Besides that, it's a fact that the Dutch authorities who received copy of the Turkish list of travel dates of Mr. Demmink never did any effort to check the status of this document in Turkey itself or to entry dates it mentions. The travel dates of Joris Demmink are stored in the computers of the intelligence agencies in Turkey. Several sources confirmed that they have seen this information available to me. The latest information confirming Demmink's travel dates we received from the Turkish prosecution office in Diyarbakir, in Kurdish region. This office has started now an investigation against Demmink and two of his Turkish allies in corruption and child abuse, the former Minister of Interior Mehmet Agar and the former police and intelligence chief Emin Arslan, who was the one threatening Mustafa after he filed his first criminal charge. One of the first results of the recent Turkish criminal investigation is that Demmink used 3 different aliases to enter Turkey at a time. The validity of Demmink's travel dates to Turkey are also confirmed by sources, including the EC report of the senior Turkish intelligence official Hüseyin Çelebi. I give your commission this report. Çelebi introduces himself in his letter of February 2010 as the Turkish intelligence official who wrote the EC report in 2006 to inform the highest military, political and juridical level officials in Turkey. In his report, he was the first to reveal what Demmink did travel to Turkey during the mid-90s and how these criminal acts were used to blackmail the Netherlands in order to force the prosecution and conviction of the Kurdish activist Baybaşin for non-existent crimes with the help of falsified telephone recordings. In his EC report, Çelebi wrote literally, Demmink also participated in similar pedophile parties in Turkey. Because a gun went off during a party in Bodrum in '95, the police arrived. Joris Demmink, who was especially occupied with the case against Baybaşin in the Netherlands, visited Turkey, he says, as a tourist in '95 and for an international meeting in Antalya in June '96. And besides that, he writes literally, he entered and left Turkey in the years 97, 98, 99, 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, and in most of the cases he wiped his tracks. This information is collected by official and special intelligence service, Mr. Çelebi writes. It's also known, he says, that he entered Turkey under different names. The Dutch prosecution office, Mr. Chairman, never investigated the sources of the EC report either. This is surprising because the information of the EC report is confirmed in an old document of the Ministry of Justice in the Netherlands itself, in which is said that, and that was a document of '97, in that document is said that the Baybaşin case is used as leverage in order to get something done from the Turkish authorities in another case. It's very clear. And it said that the responsible official in this case was Joris Demmink, '97. The first reaction of the public prosecutor on the EC report was towards me that in his view, and I have everything recorded on correspondence, his first reaction was that in his view, Hüseyin Çelebi, the intelligence officer, was a non-existent person. Hüseyin Çelebi then wrote his letter of February 2010, together with a photo of him in the company of a high-ranking Turkish politician of the ruling Turkish AK party, to the Dutch authorities, offering them, Çelebi, to answer their questions regarding his report and accusations. Also, this offer was subsequently ignored by the Public Prosecution Office. All these facts lead to only one conclusion. The criminal charges filed by the 2 Turkish boys, Mustafa and Osman, against Demmink were never investigated. The travel movements of Demmink in the '90s were never examined. None of the witnesses presented in Turkey were heard. During the orienting investigation, Demmink simply maintained his position as highest-ranking official of the Ministry of Security and Justice in the Netherlands. And on the base of this non-existent criminal investigation, the Turkish criminal charges against Demmink were dismissed by the Dutch prosecutor. It seems to be a complete repetition of what happened in the Rolodex investigation in '98. At the moment, I'm preparing an appeal against the decision of the Dutch National Prosecution Office not to prosecute Demmink for the crimes committed in Turkey and the Netherlands against my clients Mustafa, Osman and Baybaşin. I'm still waiting for a promised copy of the official file of the Turkish prosecutor who collected the entry dates of Demmink from the different authorities in Turkey in the '90s, and the aliases he used when he entered Turkey, Demmink. But according to my Turkish sources, there is a considerable pressure exerted on the Turks by the Dutch not to reveal the truth. One important issue to keep in mind is that the media have not been very supporting in informing the Dutch public about this horrific story. Most of the large mainstream media have not written anything for several years about Demmink. This weekend, probably a large national newspaper is finally going to publish new material about Demmink and other victims. The power elite in the government, we are told, has muscled the leading editors not to write about this story. I am born and educated in the Netherlands. I'm proud of the values of democracy and rule of law that govern in our society. I'm here because some of our leading officials seem to have hijacked our system, abusing all their official power to cover up their ugly behavior towards young people and others. And that's terrifying. Nobody should be above the law when he sexually abuses minors or abuses his official government position to cover this up. We only search for justice, that people come in court, and we ask your Commission help and advice to reach this. In conclusion, I would like to ask you for two things. The State Department should remove the Tier 1 status from the Netherlands, as they don't deserve it as long as this goes on. And secondly, the Helsinki Commission of the US State Department should put maximum pressure to have the official dates released which prove that Demmink was in Turkey in the 90s, as well as other convincing evidence in the hands of the Turkish authorities, I know they have, like a video made of Demmink raping one of the Turkish boys and used as blackmail towards the Netherlands. Thank you for attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. van der Plas, for your very extensive testimony. I'd like to now introduce our third very distinguished witness, the former head of the Dutch Department of Criminal Intelligence, who specialized in, as he points out in his statement, in major cases concerning organized crime, Mr. Landovin.
Mr. Chairman, Member of Congress, Congressional staff members, I want to thank you for your kind investigation to be here today to explain my findings in a very delicate matter. Approximately 9 years ago, I was approached by the law firm Bakker Schutte van der Plas, who asked me to carry out an independent, objective investigation in the case of their client, Mr. Hussein Baybashin. The investigation had to examine alleged manipulation of wiretaps by the Dutch government, which in the Turkish case against Baybashin were used, as well as possible blackmail by the Turkish government of members of the Dutch Justice Department in the Netherlands. At the start of my independent objective research, I wonder whether the theory of the law firm was not a nonsense fairy tale story. I mused that this level of corruption could never occur in my country, where I worked so hard for fighting against organized crime. I set up my research based upon the premise that the theory of the law firm was false. I've tried to prove this. This method is called the reverse burden of proof. If there is no proof for the falsity of the theory, then the theory is correct. The research that I did in the Netherlands proved me that it was possible to manipulate wiretaps and also allowing innocent people to be found guilty. I completed my research in the Netherlands with the results that a number of scientific experts were studying the results produced. Eventually, the Dutch Justice Department hired an expert who was not qualified to carry out the research and came with his own conclusion. The results was that this expert gave a wrong assessment upon which Baybashin was sentenced for life in prison. After the sentencing, I continued my research at the request of the law firm Bakker Schutte van der Plas. I did not limit my research to the Netherlands, but I did extensive research in Turkey. I've spoken with almost all the witnesses in this case, both individuals and various government officials. I document my truly by both video and audio tape testimony so that they could be used as evidence later. The result of my research were shocking for me. By speaking with many witnesses, a conspiracy became clear against Bijbezins, the victim. There was a setup or cover-up between the Turkish and the Dutch government officials at the absolute highest level. The witness confirmed what the law firm kept telling me. The picture was, what I called, was the following. A high-level Dutch justice official during the visits to Turkey requested that young boys be brought to him to order to have sex with him. This was very verified and recorded by the Secret Intelligence Service of Turkey. A high-ranking intelligence service officer gave me a copy of a Turkish report that explained the story of the Dutch justice official who had minors brought to the hotel room for sex, and the blackmail that was carried out against him in the Netherlands by the Turkish authorities. I finished my report with the purpose of giving this to the Dutch government so it could be used to carry out a criminal investigation. We sought to have an independent commission created to study this case and bring out all the facts. That committee was provided with all the available information. The commission also tried to reach the manipulated wiretaps and investigated them. The result was that the wiretaps were found to be more than likely manipulated. However, the research was provided was rejected as it was found not scientific or convincing. This research was never carried out, and thus the truth was never revealed. Sorry. At the moment that the decision was made by the Commission to travel to Turkey to interview the witness again, the Justice Department intervened again and blocked this from happening. This research was therefore never taken place and the truth never revealed. Mrs. van der Plas filed a police report on behalf of the Turks victims with the aim that the criminal investigation will be started into the conduct of the higher Dutch justice official, Mr. Joris Demmink. This type of investigation in the Netherlands are carried out by the National Investigation Union. The National Investigation Union falls directly under the College of the Prosecutors, who meets regularly Mr. Demmink, as he is the Secretary General of the Justice Department. All available information were made available by Mrs. van der Plas and myself at the National Investigation Union. We even have one of the Turkish victims travel to the Netherlands to make a statement. In addition, we also had an important witness come from Turkey to the Netherlands to speak with the National Investigation Union. The result was, as the leader of this National Investigation Union told us, that there will be no criminal investigation. The National Investigation Union had convened itself to also called a fact collection, and this had no authority to do a proper investigation. Again, I missed opportunity to fully investigation all allegations in Turkey and take testimony from the important witness did not happen. In the past years, I have done extensive research regarding more possible child abuse victims in high police and judicial officials in the Netherlands. From this research, it is being crystal clear to me that there is and has been abuse of minors by high police justice officials, and that they all effort to criminal investigations and prosecute these cases have been blocked and covered up. During my investigation, I came in contact with one of the victims who is here today and has told his story. After serious reflections, I have come to the conclusion that the Dutch government does not want and will not investigate this very sensitive issue of manipulating wiretaps under which someone is wrongfully serving life sentences, and about the young boys and the one of the highest official of the Justice Department. It's also my conclusion that after many years of research by myself, the theory of the law firm Bakker Schut van der Plas is correct. Their client, Mr. Hussein Bijmezien, was framed, and several of Mr. van der Plas' other clients were abused by the Justice Department Secretary General, Mr. George Demmink, when they were a minor. My confidence that the Dutch government will ever carry out a fair independent investigation in these two issues is completely gone. I hope that you can, or the United States can help us in resolving this matter through diplomatic or severe methods in this very sensitive issue. What I would like to ask the Commission is threefold. First, pressure the Turkish authorities to release all the information about blackmailing. Second, pressure the Turkish authorities to release the travel dates of Demmink during the 90s. This will be resolve the matter once and for all. And third, pressure the Turkish authorities to release the video made of Demmink raping one of the Turkish boys. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for that, again, very extensive, and you set out to disprove and came to an opposite conclusion. That's quite remarkable. I'd like to now show a very brief video, and then we'll go to our fourth and final witness, and that is a video of police officer Kurt Mutz, who allegedly offered Demmink security in Turkey and kidnapped boys for him for abuse, and also Mustafa, who's identifying Demmink, and we'll now watch that video. Ms. van der Plas, if I could ask you, in your presentation, you mentioned a previous case, of course, the Rolodex case, that you believe shows a pattern of investigations being shut down by Mr. Demmink. You mentioned that, quote, according to the leading investigators in the case, as soon as Demmink became a person of interest in this matter, the investigation was shut down, and that the sting operation to catch the man who identified Mr. B was compromised. This information came from leading investigators in the case, did it? And
Yes.
how many investigators on the case were willing to speak with you about this?
One investigator visited my office and told me his whole story, and he told me this. He was in the preliminary investigation, and he knew very well that this Mr. Demmink was one of the suspects. And he said we had some unofficial wiretapping, and we heard all the people speaking, but at the moment we started the official investigation, it was, all the communication was closed down. So it couldn't be different than there was a leak. And also he said, when we went to this middleman, this Mr. Van Roon, he was waiting for us. He was waiting for us, and his whole house was clean. So it was very clear. He told us, oh, there you are, we are waiting you. And he also told me that the victim who is now testifying to you gave him very reliable information at the time that he found back when he did his searches. And a question you asked the victim, I can tell you that in that case, one pimp was convicted, not very large sentence. One of it was conditional, and the condition was for a part of the prison sentence he could work in a kind of farm where children came. So the policeman who told me that was still so angry. The policemen who worked on that case are really frustrated. And I also heard, but that was through a middleman, a journalist who told me that the chief of the investigation team, a man who really believed in God and in good life, he told the journalist, I can't speak. I go every Sunday to the church to sing it away from me. That's what policemen say. And I know that Mr. Langendoen next to me spoke even to other investigators who of that team at that time who confirmed exact that information, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
You mentioned that the current State Secretary of Justice, Fred Teven, is that how you say it? Teven, stated under oath in 2007 that high-ranking Dutch officials in the Rolodex case were never prosecuted because the investigation was blocked. Was there an investigation into Mr. Teven's allegation that the investigation... Did anybody look into why it was blocked?
No, nobody ever looked in. It's also this case was kept silent. And it was very special that our State Secretary of Justice, Mr. Teven, brought that under oath in a complete different case. He said this was what happened. And what's also interesting that in 1999, Mr. Teven, when he was still intelligence prosecutor, he was prosecutor in that case, he gave an interview to a magazine for lawyers, and he said there, it's my knowledge as prosecutor of intelligence cases that it's known to me, the information I gathered, that criminal organizations in the Netherlands have influence on politicians and even on judges. So when you hear that, it's terrifying. He then was still prosecutor. But the problem is, since Mr. Teven is Secretary of State, we don't hear him anymore. So what happened, I asked Dan? Because this is what he said, and that's published. We even can show you if you would like. He said that then, that he has information, because when you see, when this happened in Turkey, that foreign intelligence agencies have influence, can blackmail our government, and that's terrifying. But not only them. When criminal organizations deliver kits to those people, to people in so high ranking inside the government and prosecution office and justice system, then those criminal organizations also have mean to blackmail those people. And that's going on for a long time when this already happened in the 90s. And even our state secretary told that to a judge, told that in public, and nothing happened.
The situation with Mr. Babason, and maybe Klaus, you might want to speak to this as well. All of us are well aware of the intensity of the feelings of Turks for Kurds and vice versa.
Yeah.
I'll never forget after the first Persian Gulf War when Kurds had made their way to the border. I went over there while it was still a very volatile situation and saw as these poor people were on the border being held by our special forces and others to simply survive.
Yes.
There were the Turks barely allowed them to be across the border.
That was the...
And so my point is, you know, the backdrop of that issue and, you know, the quid pro quo, perhaps allegation that led to the blackmailing and the situation.
That's very clear,
Please,
because
if you could elaborate on that.
Mr. Demmink was member of this EU CAF4 committee,
Right.
and he was specially responsible for the Kurdish-Turkish conflict. So he had this direct connection with the Turks. And this Mr. Babasin, this Turkish activist, was busy to let the Kurds have a better life, and some of them who couldn't have that to run away from there. So in that way they were kind of opponents, and that's why the Turkish government at the time said, we see this Babasin as a real main object, we want to silence him, and you have to help us because we caught you with those kids. And that's also what Mr. Langedoen heard in Turkey. But this whole political thing behind it is very clear. And then it's so strange that Mr. Demmink said, I didn't visit Turkey since '87. He was the main person in the Netherlands with this, who was dealing with this Kurdish-Turkish conflict and had
Well, I
contacts
think your
with
point
the
that an
Turks.
ambassador to another country would hardly stay in Washington. They would be traveling in and back and forth, would be staying there, of course. But in this case, when that's your duties, it would be a dereliction of those duties not to be traveling to Turkey. I think that was a very
Yeah.
important internal strength to your argument.
Yeah.
Can you give any indication as to why the current Turkish leadership, when these Turkish boys were so allegedly abused and exploited and raped, wouldn't find it in their own interest to protect a Turkish citizen and not want to say, whatever happened before, so be it, but not so be it, whatever happened before, wherever that goes, we want to protect our own children and now young adults.
Yes, you could say so, but at that moment, the Turkish government, that was not the nowadays government,
Right.
but was focusing on this Babasin. They wanted
Oh, sure,
to...
that government, but this government, it seems to
Yes.
me, and the Turkish government now
yeah.
more and more has spoken out against combating human trafficking, and this is the case of their own kids.
And that's why they gave
Oh.
Mr. Langedoen so much information. So we all our sources are from Turkey, official sources, other sources, isn't it, Mr. That's why they want to help us, but they, in the same time, they are forced by diplomatic pressure not to give everything, just to give pieces. That's why we are hanging in between
I
for
see.
so many years already. Yeah.
Now, the major daily that may very shortly, if you wanted to speak to that, Klaus? Okay. The major daily or the major newspaper, will this be a breakthrough in terms of finally
Telegraph.
bringing some light and scrutiny to the issue?
That will come, yes, because that is going to speak about, by the way, also investigations Mr. Langedoen did, and there are new Dutch victims who spoke about what happened to them. And that's coming very soon, huh? Isn't it?
Can I just ask you, if I could, Ms. van der Plas, you talked about Mustafa. You mentioned that, because I have met with the ambassador of the Netherlands to the United States. I do believe in hearing from all sides and doing my due diligence. Matter of fact, he did mention in his letter the Tier 1 status as if that somehow exonerated a country, and that would apply to any country. That may show a good trend, but if there are individual cases that need to be looked into, they need to be. But that said, that says nothing about this case. You talked about Mustafa. He did not feel safe in traveling to the Netherlands. You mentioned contra actions, I think was the phrase you used.
Contractions was the Rolodex case.
Okay, okay.
But the counteractions in...
Okay,
yeah.
with Mustafa, it was with safety. He wanted a guarantee of safety, and he also wanted a lawyer present.
Yes, that's what I wrote to the prosecutor, and then the
Why wouldn't the lawyer be allowed to be present with someone who wants to come forward like that? That's
yes.
baffling.
When I asked the prosecutor, and I have it all in correspondence available, I said because of the threats the boy had, I would like to be present, or his Turkish lawyer, and we want security, and because he is giving a statement against the highest man at the Ministry of Justice, and for this kid, as a Turkish citizen, he knows those people have power. And then he wrote back, Mrs. van der Plas, dit is Nederland. That means this is the Netherlands. So, no. And I couldn't guarantee my client full safety when he came, so the kid was terrified, really scared to death. Yeah.
With regards to the Turkish prosecution office in Diyarbakir, you said they now have an active investigation against Mr. Demmink, and two of the individuals worked with Turkey. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that? How long has that been going on?
This is very recently started, somewhere this spring, because the Turkish authorities want something and then all the time delay, and that's why I'm waiting now with this appeal that I get the information from them. But I know that exactly last week they made some movement and they're gonna listen to some witnesses. So there is now some progress in it, and I think when from United States side there is support for what they're going to do in this respect, that would help them really.
Let me ask you, have you been threatened? Have you personally been threatened yourself at all?
No, but I don't even see it when I'm not, how do you call it, available for that or open for that? Yeah.
Let me ask you one final question. You mentioned that a current member of the Turkish State Security Council, Mr. Salibi,
yes,
of the military wing of the Turkish intelligence service, sent to the Netherlands a list of the many visits he believed Mr. Demmink made to Turkey between 1995 and 2003. However, the Netherlands has dismissed the report, never contacted the author, who remains a special security advisor for, among other things, the Turkish Minister of the Interior. Could you speak further on that? Why would such information be shelved or refused to be acted upon, or is it being acted upon in any way? And did this Mr. Salibi run a risk in providing that information himself?
Mr. Salibi made this report...
Because again, in my conversations with the Dutch, they say that he just wasn't there. And that, exonerates him, and as you have pointed out, and others have pointed out, he came under aliases, he came other ways.
I made some attachments for your commission. His EC report is in there, and page 23 gives the dates that, he was the first one to reveal the dates that Demmink entered Turkey in the 90s, and how everything happened. But I also attached his letter to the Dutch authorities, this independent commission Mr. Langedoen spoke about, and he offered in that, he said who he was, and he offered to give all the information. But nobody ever asked him to do so and to give it. So what we gave, it was ignored. It was ignored, and we give that to you. So what he said, and I was visiting Mr. Salibi even with Mr. Langedoen, and we discussed his report. We have photos of that. Yeah. And we have also, he gave us also a photo showing, look, I write this letter that I was a special advisor of the Minister of Interior in Turkey at that time, but here, look me on the airport with this actually second person in the AK party. So this is really someone not to ignore, but the Dutch just didn't even think about it. When I would have been Ministry of Justice in the Netherlands, I'm not, I should have said, okay, the first thing I do is transparently, openly ask the Turkish government what is about this report. They never did, just ignored.
Is it a cover-up? Is it a cover-up?
What a cover-up? You mean that they don't do anything?
Right.
What we see all the time in this case, whatever we bring in fact, silence is after that. We are ignored.
Mr. Langdewin, let me ask you a question. You indicate that after years in the criminal justice system in the Netherlands, you were very surprised by the facts presented to you by Ms. van der Plas and her legal unit regarding the conviction of Babason and its relationship to the allegations against a high-ranking justice official. You said, and I quote, "At the start of your independent research, you wondered if the theory of the law firm was not a nonsense fairy tale story, and you assumed that this level of corruption could never occur in your country, where you had worked so hard against organized crime," close quote. Is it your assessment that this case is an aberration from what is normal in the Netherlands, or is it a sign of a systemic problem with organized crime?
I was shocked.
Put on your, sorry.
I was shocked about what I heard from those two lawyers when they asked me to do some investigation about that. I said it's a fairy tale. I know Holland very well about organized crime, all that kind of thing. Those things doesn't happen in Holland. That was my opinion at that moment. But they asked me, Klaas, please do the investigation. But we believe in the story. And after that, I must say, I think that it's true. That the Dutch government are blackmailed in the story of the highest-ranking man of justice.
You mentioned that the National Investigations Unit did only a facts collection investigation, but had no authority to do a proper investigation. What additional options and powers would have been open to an investigator if they had been empowered to open an official investigation, just so we understand the differences? Which witnesses did they not interview as a result of the limited investigation?
I asked the head of that investigation. I gave him all the information. I said, I can give you the people who must do this investigation. I traveled them to Turkey. I've got very good contacts during these days in contact, intelligence service, police, everything. I can introduce them. You can do a very good investigation. He said, no, we do nothing.
Why do you think that's the case?
He said we don't see anything for no facts for a criminal investigation. Then we don't do any criminal investigation. And when there is not a criminal investigation, I can do anything.
But given your extraordinary credibility and the fact that you are a man who has made a difference in meting out justice in Holland,
Yes.
Didn't that add to, the imperative that they do something? I mean, you were presenting something. You set out to disprove. You didn't think it was real. Then you came to. It seems to me that
I pressed him. I said, I've got all the information for you. I can travel with you to Turkey. We can speak to the victims, to the police officers, intelligence officers. And he said, no, I'm not allowed to do that.
Not allowed.
Not allowed.
Under pain of being fired or reprimanded in some way, do you think? Or
I don't know.
You don't know. Okay. Okay. I'd like to yield to, without objection, to one of our counsels on the Helsinki Commission, Alison Hobaugh. Alison.
Thank you all for being here today. Mr. Langendon, what is the current status of the Babason case? You did extensive research into evidence tampering with the wiretaps. Has there been any movement in the Dutch government on looking into this case any further to see if there was any miscarriage of justice?
Maybe I will, because there happened something in that case now. Till now, they refused completely to do anything. We asked again and again for investigating because the man was convicted on only telephone tapes. And Mr. Langendon even interviewed in Turkey also a policeman who said, I was helping the Dutch to manipulate those telephone tapes at the time. But they refused till now to do an investigation, but we made a revision request to the Supreme Court of the conviction of Mr. Babason, and that revision request was done April 2011. And only recently, and we brought in all the evidence we have, and we have a lot, And recently, in August 2011, the Attorney General of the Supreme Court said, I require to the Supreme Court that I can do a new investigation into this case because there is so much material, but we want to verify that material. And just recently, the day we left for Washington, that was Monday or Tuesday, I got information from the Supreme Court that they made a quick decision. It was planned on 30th of October, but they made it last Tuesday, and they said the prosecutor the Attorney General of the Supreme Court, by the new law, can do this investigation itself. So I think now that the Attorney General, different than the prosecution office, sees the value of what we have already, and he is now starting an investigation. And we just can hope that this will be a real investigation. He wrote in his conclusion very precisely that he wants to involve the defense very much, because also he believes in rule of law. But he said, I almost can't believe that this happened in my country, but let's go and investigate it. So this is a new development, but very recent. Actually, last week, before we left, yeah.
Now, will this be a full investigation or a fact-finding investigation, or a completely different type? Because
it is a very special investigation in our criminal law. It is and it is just by new law, 1st of October, made possible, and it is a fact-finding investigation by the highest Attorney General of the Supreme Court into the facts we brought, the new facts for the revision. So that will be the telephone tapes, but that will also be the interrogation of a translator who knew everything and who said that this Bijbezin was a purpose of the Turkish government. So he's going to interview witnesses, and he wants to make a new investigation on the telephone tapes and all the irregularities which you can hear already, but then to investigate it really. So it can take some time, but it will be very interesting. And of course, then you can't walk along Mr. Demmink's role anymore either. Yeah.